Hi, and good morning to everyone. And for those that are in Europe and other places, whatever the time of day is there, good day to you as well. So today we're going to talk a little bit about some of the X3 updates that we've made. You are most welcome to chip in with questions. We have a few questions here already that we will be answering. And I would like to explain to you some of the benefits and the updates that we've been working on as a development team for the X3. So, without much further ado, maybe we can just get some hand signals there if everybody can hear us well, if the sound is good. Let's just get that quickly. I'll just check there with Jordan at the production. Just give me a thumbs up if everybody's happy that they can hear us. Okay. All right. Okay. So I'm just going to give a few seconds. I just got a thumbs up there. We have, of course, a delay between what actually goes out on the transmission and what's happening in real time here. So I only know your responses, after a few seconds. I would say it's about 20 seconds or so. But anyway, if there's anything that you'd like me to reiterate, expand on, or explain a little bit deeper, please feel free. We will also make the content available afterwards. I'm very happy and excited to tell you about what we've done in the meantime. So let me jump into it. So maybe, Jordan, if you can just show that screen for us from the iPad that I'm holding here. We're going to use NDI network here to bring it up, and apparently it's up and running there. So you'll see that the VX app we used here to bring in some of the new updates. You'll see a new dashboard screen where you do your selections, a little bit more organized. And first thing I want to do is to go and show you just some of the data elements here. So I'm just going to pull up some data here. So this is stuff that you've seen before. I want to, however, talk a little bit about some of the features in here that I believe are really useful. Some of the things that I personally worked with Bryson DeChambeau and others. Many of these features came as a result of Bryson's quest for minimizing the variables in his golf swing. So it was inspiring for me, it was a challenge, and it helped us a lot to focus on some very helpful things. So let's start. So at the top there, you'll see something called EO, which is it's short for Environmental Optimizer. So I'm just going to click on the little cloud there. Now, first thing I would like you to understand here is that we are trying to capture the conditions locally when you say current location. Okay, so in the drop-down here, you can have current location. You can also enter other locations like Denver or any other special place, maybe Mexico City, some interesting places that have different altitudes and weather conditions. But for the moment, I want to say that your iPad needs to be on the internet in order to get an update on weather conditions from the closest weather station. So if I hit the update button, I will get a list there of information like the air pressure, the air temperature, the relative humidity, the wind speed, the wind direction, and so on. And then from that, we calculate something that we just published there for people that know what it means. It's called density altitude. So density altitude basically means that we compare the actual weather conditions and air density to sea level, and we will tell you that effectively, say in Orlando today, it's playing 2,000 feet and not 100 feet, something like that. Why is that? And it's a combination between air pressure, relative humidity, and air pressure, temperature, and the relative humidity. That combination will basically give you how closely the molecules are packed in the air, and we'll give you two things. There's an air density and a kinematic viscosity, which basically can be translated into an effective altitude or a density altitude. This is used by aircraft to decide how much more they have to give the plane to get up and going for a certain runway, and so on. So it's very, very important to understand the air density. Now, why do we use that? We use that so that we can postulate the what-ifs. What would the ball do if you change this, and so on. So, okay, now we've got that. Let's look at the heading direction. So the heading direction comes up with a map, and you can click on the map to set the heading direction, or you can use a compass, the electronic compass, and that will change as you show it. So you'll be showing that down the line that you will be heading. And why do we do that? We would like to have the heading direction for record purposes, so that if one day you look back at the data and you wonder, well, why did this happen? Then you could possibly go and look at what the wind was relative to your heading direction for that particular shot or for that session. So that's quite useful just for accurate data purposes. Okay, so you'll also see that we show there to the right-hand side of the little radar picture, we show the wind direction relative to the radar. So if you set your heading direction and there's a current wind direction, you're going to see the arrows showing from where the wind is coming relative to the radar direction, heading direction. Okay, so let's move on. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to hit on the blue button there, the EO, and I'm going to show you some of these elements. So immediately you'll see in this case that there's a blue trajectory that's also forming there over the yellow one. So for any of these conditions, you can actually go and change them if you wanted to see what if. You can choose for selected location. You can also select for the particular shot. Maybe you were at another place where you hit it, and then you can see how that modulates the results. Okay. The one thing that is really important is that we decided to always switch the wind off per default, because that can be really confusing. Wind is one of the most dramatic influences on the ball flight, and we would always like to start with the wind off. You can then switch it on yourself. So if you want to, you can switch the wind on, and say, for instance, there was a 10 mile per hour headwind. Now you can see on the right-hand side there that the gray value of the carry distance changed basically from 186 yards to 171 yards for a headwind for this particular shot. So wind is by default then set to off, and you have to put it on. So along the way, a few months ago, unfortunately, we introduced an error by just random mistake in the development of the software, where we actually, for the first time in 20 years, we allowed wind to influence the direct measurement, which was just a total mistake on our part. So apologies for anyone that suffered as a result of that with confusion. That's all been taken care of I think a month ago already. So, but that was an honest mistake from us, which we are really sorry for. We try to limit our mistakes, but that one came through. All right, so, and that was only when you actually applied wind to the trajectory, it would actually change the actual measured trajectory, which is not something we would like to do, because we want to always show you what we measure, and then on the blue trajectory would show you what would happen if you had certain conditions, like changing the air temperature, the air pressure, relative humidity, the wind, or the landing height. So I hope that brings a little clarity. What is the most important part here is that we've improved what we call the aerodynamic coefficients through a lot of testing. We have our own ball cannon back in Stellenbosch, South Africa, and we fired thousands of golf balls, different brands, and we basically refined our aerodynamic coefficients for, I would say, tour level balls, so that if you do this what if, using the launch conditions and the weather, you can see without wind what the ball would have done. That is really accurate now and representative, and the only factor that you have to be careful of is wind. Wind is really non-linear, it's dramatic, and its effect is always underestimated. Wind also changes with different heights. It changes along the way. It's super, super difficult. I was with Bernard Langer 2 weeks ago, down at Boca Raton in Florida, and he's using his X3, and we had a nice discussion about how he uses it, and he confirmed that through his experience, wind has the most dramatic effect, and he's just using his experience to try and judge what the effect would be when he's actually going to hit the shot. What people do not know, and what FlightScope X3 provides you with, is quantitative data and analysis of what if you change some of these parameters, which are really now effective. And I know that I saw something from Russ Ryden in the questions, which we'll come to, about the effect of wind. I'm happy to report, Russ and others, that if you apply wind now, you'll see it's really representative, and I would say very accurate in terms of the effect. So I hope that answers some of the questions there. The most important part that I wanted to bring out to you is that we've made a huge improvement in what we call the environmental optimizer, especially for shots that, for the shorter shots that you normally would go up to the green. And that's, of course, in golf, one of the most important things. And if you know the book from Mark Brody, Every Shot Counts, how far you are from the pin will determine your probability of making the putt, which directly influences your score. So at the end of the day, your accuracy towards the green is, in my mind, one of the most important aspects that you need to know, and you need to minimize your variables. Okay, so let's move on. Let me find out first there, Jordan, do we have any particular questions, comments there that we need to give attention to?
We have a question on our crowdcast here. Will an upcoming Apple update affect my X3? Seems like every now and then they do.
Yeah, thank you, Apple. Yeah, so we are constantly struggling with whatever Apple decides to do. Big tech, you know the story. They make decisions and it affects us in many ways. And we're not spared from that either. When it comes to development, Apple just decides to do something, and then what worked before in the app just suddenly doesn't work, or the app starts to crash when you switch it on. And it's something that we then have to figure out, and then we find out Apple changed something. And then we have to find a workaround in most cases. Sometimes it can take a long time. And even to communicate with Apple, just the reality, it takes a long time. It's not easy. So unfortunately, the reality is Apple is a great product. It's got a great user experience. But it actually comes with a price, in the sense that they make decisions that can influence us, users of our product and apps, in ways that we can't always predict. So my advice to you is, we at the moment we have to accept that things can happen when Apple comes out with something new, some new provisions, limitations, and others that can affect us. Something that works now might not work exactly the same tomorrow. We are on top of that. Our team is very aware, and we are doing our best to stay, ahead of problems that might occur as a result of changes that Apple might bring about. The long answer, but I think you get it. Anything else?
Next question, will we ever be able to print results right from the VX app instead of needing to send to a different program to print?
Yes, that's definitely going to come. Of course, printers have changed. So in the past, it was difficult, to do anything from an iOS device or even from, an Android device. It's becoming more and more, I would say, relevant to print directly from an app. But it's going to also require you to have a printer that is capable of doing what's called AirPrint and so on. So the answer is yes. I think it's a very useful thing, and I will personally speak to our app team, and I know that there are quite a few of our app team listening in. Hi there in Poland. So we are definitely going to put in a direct print function in our apps going forward.
Writing question here, why is there a voice on the FS app but not on the FX app?
You're repeating my question as well. So the answer is just, we've been contemplating to replace the VX app and the FS Golf app with a single app that basically has everything from both worlds. We're still working on that. So to maintain all the different apps takes a long time, and it's a huge burden for us in our time allocation. So the good news is that we are very far advanced with porting all the nice functions from the VX app into a single app, which then will be the basis, or of which the basis will be the FlightScope Golf app. Then all the nice functions like the voice and so on will be available for all your apps, which in this case will then be one app. But the VX app on its own, we've done updates because a lot of people are using it, but we took the decision to put our efforts into consolidating everything into one to make it more user-friendly, and so that you don't have to have all these apps on your iPad or your phone or your tablet.
Why does the app shut down by itself without anything being touched sometimes?
Yeah, so I don't like to blame others, but I would say that in many cases that's because Apple has done something to their operating system which just basically doesn't work anymore with something that worked before. One of the aspects that we have seen that lead to crashes, especially at startup, or sometimes the app just, the app's on and then suddenly it just crashes, is what we call web services. So there's an attempt to communicate with myflightscope.com to synchronize data and so on, and then something goes wrong during the web services, which is quite a complex process. And certain exceptions occur which are not always planned for during the development stage, and so we sometimes have to learn by experiencing those exceptions and then getting a crash report and then trying to fix it. That could be that. Some of it could also be because of the fact that the iPad or the tablet, whatever you're using, is not updated to the latest operating system status. And that will definitely have a huge effect. Another thing that can happen is that some people, they have a myriad of apps open on their tablet, iPad, or otherwise, which basically takes a lot of memory, and there are traces of code that can cause a crash with other apps once you have too many apps open. So my suggestion is, just to see this as an instrument, and when you want to use it, make sure that you don't have too many other apps open at the same time. These are just things that can happen. I'm not saying that it's exactly what's happening with every situation, because every situation can be totally different. I've seen the same app on two different iPads doing different things. And then, going through the settings, looking at, is the LTE or 3G connection, whatever that it's got, is that solid or not? Does it have that or not? Is there a good Wi-Fi signal back and forth to the radar? Are you in close proximity? All those things can make a difference in what can cause an exception. So I do think, however, that you'll find that currently there should be fewer crashes on iOS, and I know that our development team is looking forward to a new release from Apple that will bring some relief to some of the events that can happen currently, which is really difficult for us to make provision for in the code. So hang in with us. We will always be doing our best to take care of crashes, and if you do have a crash, please take the trouble to go into the settings after you start it up and send to support so that we get that crash report, and that our people, our development team, whether they're aware of the problem, and it will help them to circle closer to the solution.
Next question. I have just started using my new X3. I had a FlightScope before, and I am getting different spin rates and distances using range. Do I need to change any of my settings?
So the question there is a little confusing to me. What range are they talking about? Is it a FlightScope range or
It just says using
is
range.
it driving range? Or is it driving range balls? So I need more information to clarify that. Let me get then to the question about outdoor spin measurement. We've been working on, and I've spearheaded an effort over the last few months to improve our extraction from spin as a parameter on outdoor shots. Now, in the past, we were reasonably sensitive to the effect of wind, either from behind or from ahead. When we do spin extraction, spin, by the way, is not calculated, is measured. And whatever the spin value is that we report outdoors, it doesn't affect anything else because we don't use it as such. We just report it as a measured result. It's different to a launch monitor, which we'll get to. So we measure the trajectory and everything else, and then spin is also measured and reported. Now, sometimes we can have what we call a double or a half spin under certain circumstances, like if we hit into a headwind, then the software has to decide, is the lift that we saw, was that a result of wind or was it a result of spin? And because we get what we call multiple spin peaks in our spin spectrum, the logic in the software could sometimes get a little bit confused, and it would choose a double or a half spin. Now, it's easier said than done, but we did a lot of work, and now I'm very happy to say that I personally attended a very windy day with Bernard Langer, and he's very concerned about every value. If there's one value that doesn't make sense, he can be very upset. And we were heading into some heavy winds, and he was extremely happy because when I came there, he was like, okay, so I'm really unhappy about the spin numbers. They're very, well, and I said to him, well, that's why I'm here. We've did a lot of development work, and let's see if the work paid off. And lo and behold, it did. He was extremely happy, and he congratulated us, and I'm happy to say that you will see hugely improved spin results from outdoor shots now. There are things that can happen with balls that are scuffed, bad, cracked, and so on, or range balls. And then you also have to remember that if you're on a driving range, even if it says Titleist practice and it looks like it's a Pro V1 practice balls like we had with Bernard Langer at Boca Raton, those balls are not the same as a Pro V1 that you buy in the shop. He actually saw that, and many other pros confirmed that as well, that those balls, for instance, go a little shorter than the actual balls that you will buy in the shop in your sleeve, if you buy Pro V1s or Pro V1X, whatever. So, for instance, with Bernard Langer, he was hitting, I would say, 160 yards with his 7-iron, and he would be hitting with his normal tour balls, and then with the Titleist practice balls, which are Pro V1s, brand spanking new, he would be hitting like 4 yards shorter. And for pros at that level, they know exactly what they do. So he was concerned that why is that, and we found it's the ball. So then if a ball has a crack in, a little crack or a scuff mark, you can also get problems in terms of how it's spinning, in actual fact or in fact of how it's measured. So I would like to offer that if you haven't updated the firmware on your X3, you should do it because that's where all the new spin processing happens. Make sure you've got the latest app. The app that I'm actually showing you here should be released within the next week or two max, and I'll be pushing for that. I'll be personally involved to make sure that it happens. You will see, and you should see, a hugely improved spin reporting on outdoor shots.
When you're using a range ball, do you get a different spin rate off a mat versus off the ground?
Yeah, it's a huge issue, not with measuring, but how the ball compresses. So we have to remember that the interaction between the club, the ball, and the surface, when we are hitting an iron, of course, with a driver, you're hitting it over tee. But if you are hitting down on the ball with irons, which you should be doing, the club will contact the ball the ball actually pushes into the surface, ground, grass, whatever, or the mat, and there could be an amount of slippage that will influence how the rotational energy is transferred, because that it's a torque vector that actually introduces the spin. And if there's any form of slippage between either the club and the ball or the ball and the surface, it's going to influence how those reaction forces imparts the spin, okay? And that can be huge numbers. There can be huge differences. For instance, let's just look at firstly the club and the ball. If you put, if you have a few blades of grass in between your club and the ball at strike, in other words, you're hitting from the rough, we all know the spin goes down. It can halve. You could be hitting like 6,000 with a 6,000 RPM with an iron or something like that, or normally on a good surface, and then suddenly you're hitting from the rough and you're hitting 2,900 RPM easily. But what does the surface do? The surface has got its own reaction force onto the ball, which basically produces the rotational energy, so to speak. And so if there's some slippage, it can also happen. We've seen here at Shingle Creek, at certain positions at the driving range, they have a very thin layer of grass, and then underneath they've got sand. And we've seen some strange results about, for a particular player, hitting down with a particular angle of attack, and how that slippage of the ball between, when it's compressed into the ground, or a lack of, basically produces a huge variety of spin. And then you would also remember that people think they hit the ball clearly every time, and many amateurs don't, inclusive of myself. If you look on a very fast, like a phantom camera, we even had Bryson DeChambeau in here when we were testing shafts, and on a mat, most people are catching the mat before they catch the ball, even though it feels like, it looks like you're hitting the ball first. Nope. As soon as it depends on the mat that you stand on, as soon as you start to transfer your weight, if you look on a phantom camera, the ball starts to move on a mat. A mat is, you can be really confused on a mat. So you must be very careful what you perceive from what's happening on a mat, with an iron especially. With a driver, the thing that can happen there, I've seen this here on a phantom camera, that if somebody really swings hard and pushing down, on the front leg, the tee moves and the ball actually starts to fall off the tee by the time the club gets to the ball. I've seen that at 20, 30,000 frames a second here in our studio, depending on who hits the ball. So strange things can happen on a mat, and I wouldn't be too concerned if I start hitting shots that have got different spins off a mat than what I get on the range or on the course. I think we must just accept there's a difference in the physics, there's a difference in the reaction forces from the ground, whether the ground meaning mat or surface outside. That makes a huge difference to how the spin is imparted. Long answer, but I hope it helps you.
Next question. I am hoping you can tell us more about the new hitting direction, proper setup for this function, and how to disable it if desired. We currently find it confusing as we get two values from our X3, first initial data and then updated data with another value 1 second later.
Okay, so I think we've got two questions maybe, that relate to about 3 different things. So let's just talk, and if you still have my screen on there, I would like to just, Jordan, do we have the screen on there? Yep, okay, so basically the hitting direction is specifically for the data set that we know in which direction we were hitting relative to the prevailing wind direction. So that's one of the most important things we want to do there. So now let's talk about data that changes. So I'm basically going to go to another screen here, the dashboard screen. I'm going to also show you something new. So with the X3 on outdoor mode, the numbers you see here, like the carry distance, will only be available once the ball lands, okay? But what we have done in the meantime is we've got something that's called sequential results. In other words, as you strike the ball, you're going to get club speed, ball speed, vertical launch angle, horizontal launch angle, and after about a second or so, you're going to get spin rate, and then, interestingly enough, that within 2 seconds, I'm going to show you something else. I'm pushing the EO there at the top. Within 2 seconds, everything that's in gray there should be coming up, and you are now getting what's called the environmental optimized results based on just the launch conditions. Okay, so that is an initial result based just on launch conditions, and the final result is when the ball lands. So in order to also answer that question, I want to show you something else. You'll see there's another button there called Launch Monitor, so I'm going to click that. So in this particular case, that session wasn't actually taken with this new app. So with Launch Monitor here, basically these results will come up immediately and sequentially as they're available, and within 2 seconds you're going to get a carry distance, a roll, total distance, lateral, all of that based on the launch conditions and the currently selected environmental conditions. Okay, so even if you have the environmental optimizer off at the top, if you have that button click there, Launch Monitor, it gives us a Launch Monitor screen, which means it's immediate results. And I'm going to get back to the question of that we just heard. I just wanted to quickly explain to you why did we bring this in, because the FlightScope is not a launch monitor, it's a full flight tracking monitor. Okay, so you might have wondered why people like Bryson DeChambeau and others are using sometimes, something like a GC quad there with them in front, and they have an X3 behind them. It's basically, it was simple. Somebody like Bryson wants to see some results immediately because he's impatient. He wants to see it now. And he's working maybe on something like ball speed or something. And in the past, with the outdoor systems, our results literally came only when the ball landed. Now, with a guy like Bryson, guess what? The driver, the ball stays in the air for 8.5 seconds. So he's not patient enough to wait for 8.5 seconds to see some results. So he wants to see some stuff right now. So this is what we did. We decided to also provide a launch monitor screen that's going to provide the launch data right away. And by the time you look back onto the screen, everything is there related to the carry distance, roll, and so on that are calculated based on the selected weather conditions. Okay. That's very powerful because now you can also do something else. You can actually use what we call the listener mode. So you can actually go into the system and settings, and you see the operator listener. If you select the listener mode, you can actually use 2 devices, 2 iPads, for instance, or 2 Android tablets. And you can have one looking at the trajectory, and the listener mode could be, say, in the launch monitor mode. So now you can have a tablet at the player, which gives launch data right away, and maybe the caddy or somebody else is looking at other screens or the same screen, doesn't matter. But so in this case, most people would look, at the trajectory and some data elements and whatever, but now you can actually go into the dashboard screen, you can go in launch monitor screen, and you will see as soon as the ball's hit, you're going to see some data coming up on the launch monitor screen, which is basically gives somebody like Bryson an hour reason to get rid of anything else like a GC quad. So this is great because it's immediate, it's sequential as the results come out, and I think it's going to be an extremely useful facility that people can use to see some of the data that are available before the ball lands. Okay, so to come back to the question, can you get away from setting the hitting direction? Unfortunately, not at the moment. We decided that it's important for the software to understand where are we heading towards, so that when we know what the weather is doing, especially the wind and the wind direction, we can separate out what the effect of the wind is in terms of how the ball's flying versus what effect the spin is making, so that it helps us to make a better decision to filter out, the exact spin number, because we get, as I say, we get a few spin peaks that we need to decide which one is which, and setting the hitting direction, knowing the wind direction relative to the hitting direction, helps us to help you to make a better set of results. So I hope that makes sense, and I hope I also answered the question about some results that change. Sequential results come up as they happen, and then at the end when the ball lands, you basically get your final result. But with the launch monitor mode, you get almost immediate results, and carry distance and total distance and so are then calculated based on the environmental conditions that you selected.
Next question, would there be a way to tell X3 our ground condition, soft or firm, to get better roll numbers? Roll seems inaccurate at times.
Okay, so if you go to the settings, basically in configuration, I actually was there already, so let me go there. Little gearbox to the left there at the bottom. Okay, so let me get there. So basically, surface type, soft, medium, hard. We just decided to use three surface types. Now, depending on where you are, that's going to make a difference. And it's actually a model that we use, a physics model. So we look at the angle of descent, we look at the speed into the ground, we look at the final spin, and so on, and then we calculate based on what we believe would be either a soft, medium, or hard surface, what response we will get from the ball. So if you, for instance, choose a soft, if you choose a soft surface type, and you hit maybe a gap wedge or something, and you really spin it high, maybe 10,000 RPM, if you can, you're going to find that even the model sometimes will show you that the ball had backspin. And I've done this here at Grand Cypress in Orlando a few times, and I was personally amazed to see how accurate the model is when it comes to that kind of thing. Of course, if you set it too hard, the surface type, and you are playing on a relatively soft surface, you're gonna get an overestimate of your roll. So I normally use it, and I think the default should be on medium. But if you are playing a soft surface, then all you need to do is to do the soft selection there, and that should give you a much better indication of your roll. The good news is, if you change it, it's going to give you something else, and hopefully that answers your question.
Next question, my X3 only tracks out about 150 to 200 yards, then the track line turns red. I thought it tracks the entire ball flight.
It does, and if it gives you that, then there could be one of three things that can happen. The first thing is you might be walking or bending down and picking up a new ball, and while the ball is still in the air and the system is trying to measure the ball, and you might be blocking the view of the unit. So remember, in order to measure the full flight of the ball, we must give the system a chance to measure the full flight of the ball, so stay out of the way. So I normally prefer not putting my balls in front of me. I put them behind me so that I'm not tempted to actually walk in front of the system while it's trying to track the ball while it's flying. So that's number one. The second thing is, depending on how you set the system up, it might not be pointing nicely and clearly towards your preferred hitting direction, and you might be hitting a pull shot, to the one side, and you might be physically blocking the system at the point where then it can't see the ball anymore, and it's just going to measure it until it can. So I've seen that as well. The other thing that can happen, and that's something that we are working on, is sometimes on a very busy range, there are other balls flying, and then instead of when the balls are crisscrossing, the system might decide, the software might decide, okay, I'm cutting it off here. There are too many things happening out there, and I've seen that as well. We know how to treat that. We know how to solve that, if that is the case in your case. The good news is we're working on that because it's not very difficult for us to solve. But I would say the risky one that we need to determine with you is your system in good working condition? Because it's got a lot of channels. It's got 20 channels inside there, receivers that give signals back. And if something is wrong inside of your unit, channel could be broken because of it's a physical thing, then it can also happen. So it would be good to get a raw data sample to support, so they can send it through to some of our engineers. We can have a look at the data quality on all those 20 channels, outdoor please, and then we can determine at least is the system in good order or is it something else. So we would love to get a raw sample of such a case, or just any ball outdoors for your system, and then we can determine what the most likely cause is for that.
Next question, are you saying I can use one iPad to capture the video DOL and use another iPad to control what I want to happen?
Just repeat the question.
Are you saying I can use one iPad to capture the video DOL and use another iPad to control what I want to happen?
To capture the video.
To capture the video DOL.
Okay, so I'm trying to make sure that I understand the question exactly. So I'm going to answer it differently because there are some words in there that I'm not exactly sure if I understand the question perfectly, because I'm hopping between a few interpretations here. Maybe expand a little bit on the question. In the meantime, I'll give you some answers that hopefully will help you. So firstly, are we talking about the VX app or are we talking about the FS Golf app? So we need to distinguish there. So if we're talking about the VX app, you can basically, in the VX app, you do have a button there for recording video. So you can have an iPad set up to record video down the line, or wherever, and you can have another iPad in listener mode or in operator mode showing you another data screen. So yes, the two can co-op. Using the same data set, and you could be using different views, or then, as you might have indicated there, a different function like video recording on the one, and the other one is just showing some data screen. If that answers your question, I'm not sure. If I didn't answer your question, please elaborate and make it a little bit more specific so I understand a little better what you're asking. I hope that helps.
Another question, are we able to set up distance targets without switching to a different program?
All right, so at the moment, your question is there because we have to use a different app, okay? But in the FlightScope Golf app, you can set margins, which we brought in. So in the FS Golf app, which you can run on a phone or on a tablet, you can already set margins that will give you red or green. So the ability is there in the FS Golf app to set limits and to get immediate flash back in red or green if you're within your range or not. But when it comes to skills, at the moment the skills is still a separate application. Of course, the plan is to consolidate things so that within one dashboard screen we will have the option to do either skills or whatever you want to do. So that's in the works. It's going to happen. In the meantime, if you're using the VX app, we're going to hold back on the development because we are going to focus more of our effort onto consolidating all the apps into one, where the data margins, of course, they're already in that app. And then for the skills, that's a totally different discussion. We will be deciding how to bring skills in. I think a proper way to do that would be to bring it into one of these dashboard items that you can choose to do a skills test within one app. So I agree with that request. I support that wholeheartedly, and I'll help to push it along.
I can update the apps easily as it is automatically done when I open them. What do you mean by updating firmware? And then someone else was asking if we'll be covering the firmware upgrade.
Right, that's a very good question, and something that I've seen as a potential weakness in the whole, so to say, rollout of firmware and software. Now, as somebody's pointed out there, apps, some people update their apps. Some apps are automatically updated depending on your settings. I've seen people not even updating their apps. I've seen people having, old apps because their settings on their iPad or so are not so that they automatically update. So it is important to make sure that if you're using an iOS device, that from the App Store that you're in sync, that it's all updated. But that was not the question. The question is what's the update on the firmware about? Now, firmware is what lives on the radar. Now, the radar's got quite a few processors inside, and a lot of the number crunching, most of it actually happens on the radar itself, and that is called firmware. It's basically software that lives in a chip. Now, what we need you to do is you need to have your application like the VX app or the FS Golf app or even the Skills app, you need to have it open and connected to the internet from time to time. That means that there are now different scenarios. You might have an iPad that's got LTE, in other words, mobile data service, and it's got Wi-Fi. So if it's got data from a provider like T-Mobile or Verizon or AT&T, you should be in good shape, because if you open the app, it's on the internet and it's going to see, hey, I've got new firmware for the radar available. It's going to pull it down and it's going to burn it into the radar. It takes a few seconds and the radar is going to reset itself and reboot, and it'll take a minute or two. That's really important if you want to make use of all the work that we put in to make data better for you. So keeping the firmware updated on the radar is really important, but you need to make sure that your app is open and your device, this device, iPad or tablet or phone, is connected to the internet. Wi-Fi doesn't mean internet. I've heard this, I'm saying the question was from somebody that means that, but I just wanted to point it out there that I've heard people talking about Wi-Fi as if it's internet. The iPad, tablet, phone with the X3, we use Wi-Fi, okay, wireless communication between the tablet and the X3. Now, if you don't have data from T-Mobile or otherwise on your iPad, and it's just got a Wi-Fi function, and you're connected to the X3, guess what? Your app's not going to know that there's new firmware available. So you're locking out the possibility of checking for new firmware. The app will check for firmware, but it requires internet connection. So make sure that from time to time, you take your iPad, you open the app, because with Apple, they control everything. If the app's not open, the app is sleeping. Okay, it can be in the background, but it's not doing anything. It's pretty much dormant. And you need to have the app open and alive and then connected to the internet so that the app will check for firmware availability. It'll download the new firmware, and then once you connect your iPad or your tablet again to the X3, it will say, hey, wait a minute, I've got new firmware. I'm going to download it to the X3, and it updates it. So I hope that's clear, but that's super important.
Do I need to change the temperature settings for winter, or does the system pick up the temperature automatically? The ball usually doesn't travel as far in cold weather.
Okay, so we are talking most likely about the environmental optimizer. In the environmental optimizer, if your device, your iPad or your tablet or your phone is connected to the internet, and you say update environmental conditions, it will pull from the local weather station what's going on in terms of air temperature, relative humidity, air pressure, and so on, wind direction, wind speed, and so on. So, yeah, it's going to, that changes all the time. Winter, summer, that's a huge difference, but the environmental conditions change almost on a daily basis, sometimes on an hourly basis. It's only used for determining what we call what if. In other words, and that's when, if I go to a session again, and I actually push, the environmental optimizer, whatever happens there in gray has used now the launch conditions, and it's used the environmental conditions, and it's actually postulated, it's calculated the what if. So you don't need to change anything in the environmental conditions unless you want to for a particular purpose. What does that mean? If you want to see what your ball is going to do when it is, 20 Fahrenheit, then you put in 20 Fahrenheit, and you'll see. So let's do that. So let's actually go and go into the temperature. So today it was 77, and this morning 8:30 when Tracy was hitting balls there for us. So we're going to now change this to, I'm just going to make it 32 Fahrenheit, okay? Okay, so this particular ball will just go a little shorter, 3 yards shorter. And the longer you hit, the more it's going to be influenced, and that's how it works. So you can actually change that as you wish. I'm just putting it back to what it was. So I hope that answers your question. Next question.
What does the slow swing speed switch do in settings?
Okay, so we brought in the slow swing speed as a filter to tell the software what to expect. Normally, we expect balls that swings, firstly, swing speeds and ball speeds that are relatively high. But, maybe for older people or kids, they might not swing so hard. And we would like to tell the system to expect something a little slower, because sometimes the software, at least how we developed it initially, was a little bit harsh in terms of how it decided, was this something for me or was this something else? In other words, am I looking at what I should be looking at? So it's just to set the expectations for the software in terms of what to be looking at. Expected, in other words, swing speed, expected ball speed, kind of. And we just basically put in slow swing speed to make sure that we look at really slow swings as well.
Now, I carry a Kestrel 3500 instrument that gives me all the environmental optimizer conditions. I would like to remove wind only and do so on each shot dynamically. I understand that the software can be set to show what would happen under certain conditions. I want to reverse that and show what would be happening if the wind were not blowing.
Thank you, Russ Ryden. I know that's you asking the question. Yeah, so the Kestrel is what Tim Tucker used when he was still caddy for Bryson, and swing it around, get local conditions, and that's all good. Russ, the good news is we've already actually changed the software so that wind is off as a general rule. So wind will be set to off, and only when you set wind to on will the effect be seen. And this is super important because wind can be extremely confusing, as I pointed out. So when you use the environmental optimizer now, out of the box default, it will be with wind off. Therefore, you don't even have to worry about it. It's going to be excluding wind, taking into account the other conditions that you selected or that was pulled from the local weather station, excluding wind.
When can we get a better range for ball flight?
I am not sure if I understand that. Maybe the question is, when do we get range balls to be more relevant when it's measured with the X3 outdoors? I'm not sure. Is that the question? So maybe, Jordan, maybe let us find out, whoever posted that question, maybe can just rephrase it a little bit.
Yeah, we have his email. We can.
Yeah.
Maybe he's on here. We'll see.
I'm going to answer the question as if I understood it. So here's what I heard. No, here's what I interpreted. I interpreted that the question is potentially, if I measure range balls, how do I relate that measurement to a tour level ball, I guess. Probably one, something like that. Now, firstly, there are many range balls out there of different makes, different ages, different conditions. Some balls that I've seen in Japan don't even have dimples anymore. they look like table tennis balls. So to measure on a range and to postulate what that would mean when you use the balls that you're going to play with is how long is a piece of string kind of question. So it's difficult. We do have a function that's a generalized function where we say, okay, if you use a range ball, then we will allow to change the results by modifying the lift and drag coefficient slightly to something that is more, I would say, applicable. But it's, as I say, it's literally how long is a piece of string question. It's really, really super difficult to use a range ball and say, okay, so what would a Pro V1 do? It's easier said than done because there are so many variables when it comes to range balls that it's just a can of worms. So the ball's mass might be different, the surface area might be different in terms of the dimple sizes, the quality of the dimples. It's so many things that happen there. I mean, and as I told you, even with the Titleist Pro V1 practice, it says practice, at where we go to, like, you know, top ranges like Boca Raton where people are playing like Bernard Langer. Those balls are not even at the same level as a Pro V1 that you buy in the shop. It's almost there, but it's not there. So it's a forever difficult thing to do. So what I would do, I would actually hit some of the balls that I play with, and I do that at home. I will hit some of the balls into a net that I don't want to hit out in the lake because I live on a lake. And I will use the launch conditions, and then I'll put in my weather conditions, and then I'll see what if. So then that's without wind, and, you know, I'll get a good baseline of how far I would hit the balls. And if I go to the range, I'm focusing on something like smash factor or just ball speed, or just consistent distance, or, you know, landing area, whatever. So I focus personally on something specific. I'm not too worried about how far did it actually go compared to what I would do on the, you know, on the course. So range balls is a can of worms. Sorry to say, but there's no sudden solution for that.
Last question. Can you go through how to turn on the EO so I can see what the flight looks like with and without it?
Yeah, well, the EO, if I understand it correctly, the EO, firstly, I'm not sure, do you see the screen there, Jordan? Okay, so this is a shot now which is the measured shot. If I hit the EO, then the blue trajectory comes in saying, okay, for the weather conditions that I added now, that's what I get there. But now let's add some wind here. I'm going to add some serious wind here. I'm going to add 10 miles per hour from the side. And there we go. The blue trajectory is what would happen if I had everything else the same in terms of weather conditions, except I've got a 10 mile per hour wind coming from the side, from the right-hand side. The blue line actually shows what it will do. The distance stays still same, you know, it appears to be similar. It's just, it's got a lateral offset to the left, and whatever was a little, you know, finite draw initially now becomes, you know, a sharper draw. So I'm not sure if I answered the question, but your blue trajectory that you see there is the what if. That's the environmental optimized result. That's a calculated result based on all the environmental conditions at the top there. And if I change the wind from the front, okay, now suddenly that shot goes higher. It goes, you know, 9 yards, almost 10 yards shorter. And if I put the wind from behind, 10 miles per hour, now it goes 7 yards further. Okay, so, and if I say wind off, then wind is not used in this equation. I hope that answers your question. All right, so I'm extremely excited about a few things here that I've mentioned. The one is, as I said to you, the new function which you'll find, on the dashboard screen there, which is called the launch monitor mode. I believe that's super exciting. Also here you can see the environmental conditions, of course, the environmental optimized results. If you go to dual display, but Launch Monitor just gives you that immediate results. You can use a listener mode, and you can have operator looking at maybe another screen and listener looking at another screen as well. So that's all very, very powerful stuff. The new updated spin processing that we've done for outdoor, you'll definitely see the results from that. I think you'll be very happy. Using the environmental optimizer to see what if without wind, to me, is really super important, and this is something that Bryson and people like him, the few that are out there that think the same way, use. They want baseline numbers without wind, which we can get now perfectly and accurately with the X3 over your data set. So I would say that it's extremely valuable, and I think that you will enjoy it. So thank you very much for joining us today, and we'll do this again. I think it's been a long time since we had the X3 on the table here with a discussion on the webinar, but it's been fun, for me to just explain to you what we've got here, and be sure that we'll be on top of this, and we'll always improve the system. There are some very exciting things that we're working on the X3 for the end of the year, for the PGA show, that Hold Thumbs will be happening, all said and done. So keep in contact, and any good ideas or any ideas, please let them come in. We'll always look at that and see what we can do to make it easier for you and make it fun. So have a good day.